We had some back and forth with
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you. We had our a little bit of back and forth about pre-ETs. I know when we were discussing contracts, that sort of thing. So we thought it might be helpful to clarify again what some of the guidelines are around both pre-ETs travel and transportation, and then also general travel and transportation. So I am going to share my screen. Okay, I don't seem to have the ability to share my screen.
Well, I thought I made you a co-host. Let me double.
You did. But just a quick review while we're waiting. Essentially, for pre-ETs, travel is embedded under the service time, and that continues to be accurate. So when you get authorization for, let's say, pre-ETs job exploration counseling, you and your referring vocational rehab staff should have a conversation about how much of that time is going to be spent on travel. And they might say, well, I will, allow up to 2 hours of travel for the number of trips you plan to make to work with this individual. So then that would mean maybe you have 5 service hours, you will get 7 total service hours, and 2 of those are designated as helping with travel. Then when we move into our general menu of services, these are for adults that no longer qualify for pre-employment transition service funding. That's where we have the set rate of $50 an hour, both for travel, which is your travel back and forth as a provider, and then transportation. Some of our partners here today on the call allow for transporting clients in their vehicles.
Okay, Janine, I think you should be able to share your screen now.
Okay, thank you. Nope, I still am getting a grayed out button.
Can you send it to me and I can share?
Sure, yes, I will do that. I have the Community Partner Service Guide open. Sorry for the technical difficulties here. We'll get this figured out. So I am putting it in our regular Teams chat to just open up that tab.
Okay.
And then I will send you a Word document as well that we might be doing some editing as a group, okay?
Do you just want me to open any tabs, Janine, at this point?
Go ahead and open up the travel.
Okay.
And I'm just going to quickly send Sarah my document, and then I'll get back into it here.
All right, how's that working?
That's working perfectly. Okay, so just some definitions again and some reminders. Travel expense is when you are going to and from the participant. We have that standardized at $50 an hour. And again, this is under our general menu of services. This does not apply to our pre-employment transition youth. And it's essentially reimbursement. So what we ask for on a report is the date of service, always. Your unit cost of, whatever the $50 an hour, obviously. And then a starting point and an end point. If the end point is a client's home, you can simply write, participant's home. We have that information in our system to look up an address. If you are going to store locations, it's helpful to say like Target, Plymouth, and give the zip code. And if your starting location is always your main office base, you can also say that I'm leaving from, LJ&A main office to Target, Plymouth, and the zip code. We also accept zip code to zip code, but we try to dial in, depending on the information, if you can add a little more detail, it's helpful, because what our staff have to do to verify that the amount of time you are asking for is reasonable is that we sometimes have to look up like MapQuest or something like that just to get a general timeline. We do not pay for time that you normally would be spending. Like, let's say, for example, a trip is normally 15 minutes and it turned into half an hour today because of traffic or because of construction. Please only bill the typical 15 minutes, that you could verify as well by mapping it yourself. So we try to ask that we can't pay for those sorts of unforeseen delays, weather, that sort of thing. And then transportation is a little bit different. Transportation is when there is an individual in your vehicle, either your company vehicle, or if your company allows you to transport in your personal vehicle and you have the correct liability insurance for that, then just whenever you have a participant with you. And again, under general, it's $50 an hour. There are a couple of wrinkles to this. So for travel, you should always let the referring vocational rehab professional know that you would like to have travel on your authorization. And you will see either a separate line item or you might get a separate authorization depending on if it was after the fact that will say travel this many hours at $50 an hour. With transportation, you do also need to have this conversation with the referring vocational rehab counselor. Typically, they might bring it up as well because it, is a need of the individual. They can't get someplace to meet with you either on public transportation or by getting a private ride. Or it's not going to be reasonable or timely for them to make it to work and you're going to be their job coach anyway. And it's, so they'll probably arrange this with you anyway as part of that discussion around transportation overall for the individual. That being said, it has to be on the employment plan. And occasionally, if a family's income for a young person or if a person's individual income is higher than our typical threshold, we have something called Consumer Financial Participation, or CFP. So for example, if I'm someone that's unable to drive and I'm looking for continuing my career and I currently make, a significant amount of money, but I'm looking to advance my career and I'm eligible for voc rehab, it's possible that I might owe you 100% of that $50 and voc rehab pays nothing, or it's possible that I might owe you like 25% of it and voc rehab covers 75% of it. We don't have a large number of circumstances where that applies because we also say that if someone is on SSI or SSDI, they're automatically exempt from that participation. And the thresholds are fairly significant. So it's not a common occurrence, but it is a possibility. This does not apply to those youth again, because when we provide pre-employment transition services, we do not have that boy, I cannot get the words out. That consumer financial participation doesn't apply to those services. So again, you could, under those service hours, you could be transporting students if you wanted. But again, it's always a discussion ahead of time with the referring professional. It's not possible to go back and say, by the way, for job coaching, I ended up driving the person this many times, or by the way, I've been traveling a lot for this service and I'd like some travel time now. Just like with all of our services, we really have to pre-encumber that funding. You should have a work authorization in hand that designates some travel or transportation for general, or that you've had a documented conversation with the pre-employment transition service time. Okay. Sarah, if you don't mind sharing my examples, I'd like to talk through a couple of unique situations. There is.
Did you send them to me?
I put it in the Teams chat. It's a Word doc.
Okay.
Let me try again. Maybe it didn't go through. There it went. I'm sorry.
Okay.
There are some more complex examples where you are transporting a number of students. I didn't share that today because that is a rarer circumstance, but we can also go through one of those examples if folks would like. So example 1 has to do with those pre-employment transition or pre-ETS travel time. Again, it's embedded into the service time. So let's say that a provider travels from the office to the school and they're going to see 5 students that day. It's 15 minutes one way, so 30 minutes round trip. And their hourly pre-ETS rate for the service provided on their contract is $100 an hour. You've had the conversation with your voc rehab counselor or rep. They said, yep, we're going to allow for a couple hours of travel time for you to go out to the school, see these 5 students, and walk them through some post-secondary exploration. For example, here's how you would invoice that. On each of the 5 students, you would create an invoice. And the way you would calculate it is, if you were just traveling to see one person, you would get to bill 0.5 units or 30 minutes, which would equal $50 an hour based on your $100 an hour rate. You're going to divide that by the 5 students, and it's going to equal $10 per student. This is one of those times we don't care about the 15-minute increments. You don't have to round it up. On your invoice, you're just going to say 1 each, group travel. Maybe it makes sense to say pre-ETS group travel. $10 is your total invoiced billing amount. On your report, you want to indicate that you had 5 students you went to see and that it was a half-hour trip, and give the starting and ending location. Okay. Another example that just came up the other day, and I thought it was really interesting, this can be for general services. So let's operate under the $50 an hour. A provider is traveling from their office and they go to job site A and they check in and spend a couple hours job coaching that individual. Then they go from site A to another site, job site B, and they're coaching another individual. And then they will return back to the office. The way we would invoice that is that for individual A, you got some travel time authorized. You're going to invoice for the travel time from the office to job site A. And that's your trip. So if it was half an hour one way, you would get to charge $25 to individual A. For individual B, you're going to show the travel from site A to site B, and then your back trip. So your back trip might be now only 15 minutes because you're a little closer back to work, and you spent 15 minutes going from site A to site B. I don't know, I didn't go that specific, but that's how you would break that up. Is you would consider, okay, I went from my office to site A, and that was it for my travel for that individual. I didn't end up doing a round trip back to my office. Now my starting point is that job site. I'm going to job site B, and then I'm returning home, and that is all the travel associated with individual B. So if you kind of think about it like a loop map and where it starts being part of the service you're going to provide to individual B rather than individual A, that's how we consider those general services. General transportation and travel, there is no group breakdown. Pre-ETS is the only time that you go in and break down your rate based on seeing more than one individual at a time. It's rare you would meet with more than one general service individual at a time, but if it does happen, you are going to just charge at the $50 rate per individual. We don't break those apart by group. So I am hoping that you all are putting questions into the form about this, because I know I haven't touched on everything, and I know I haven't covered everything, but I think it's most helpful when we get to the Q&A session if I can continue to talk about this topic and help answer any of the questions that come up about travel and transportation. Sarah, is there anything else you would like me to cover? Again, this is kind of going off of, we're all used to travel and transportation. There's some basics we kind of don't need to review. I'm happy to give a more in-depth tutorial to anyone that asks. We can go back to the basics and kind of talk about invoicing and reporting and how to figure it out. But most important, have that conversation with your voc rehab professional. Some of them will bring it up to you and say, do you need some travel? Others will not. So please take that responsibility of having that conversation if it hasn't come up. You all are entitled to the travel time. And so it's reasonable to request that. unless it's just part of your normal day-to-day, oh, I make this route and I'm right here in the metro and it's not that far away. I mean, you can certainly make that as a business decision, but it's definitely a service that we support. One other quick quirk that I want to bring up, and I know we've had this conversation before, has to do with when you drive and you get there and the individual doesn't show up. Whether that's a student or whether that is an adult general person, you still get to bill your travel time. Our federal funder says we can't have you charge a no-show fee. So you don't get to charge for any service time, you know, of actually, gee, I should have been here with this person and I wasted my time. But what you did provide was the travel. The travel says what we're buying from you essentially is your time to get there and back. So if you are doing that, you drove there, you got there, the person didn't show up. So you've actually provided the contracted service and you can invoice for that and bill for that. Sometimes our staff are not clear on that. We're happy to help provide that answer, but I'm just letting you know as partners that you have that ability to bill for a trip you made, even if the individual doesn't show up.
Janine, we do have some questions coming in, and I'll be the moderator for the questions. So the first question that has come in is a clarification. So if I receive an authorization and I want travel, I need to call or email for a separate new authorization, correct? And then, do you want to go, Janine?
Yep. If you did not already have the conversation and you get the authorization and you're like, oh, shoot, there's no travel or transportation on it. Yes, you should get a separate authorization. But if, as part of the discussion about service hours, you did have the conversation, you might get just one authorization that has the service you're providing and then a separate line that says travel or transportation. Again, this does not apply to pre-ETs. On pre-ETs, some of our teams will make a little note down in the comment section saying 5 hours are for the service, 2 hours are for travel. Some don't. So that's part of where you know you had the conversation, the counselor's case noted it, you got this weird 7 hours when you're only going to provide 5 hours. Makes sense that you have travel approved. And if you're ever not sure, contact the referring professional.
Thank you, Janine. I've got another one here. And is travel covered under general PBA? And I'll actually throw out general PBA and we'll throw E1 PBA in there as well.
At this time, the only time you can't charge travel or transportation is for a performance-based agreement. Those milestone payments are supposed to encompass, and we know they don't, they're very low, but they are supposed to encompass all of your business costs for doing job search with the individual. So PBAs, you may not ask for travel or transportation, and that is one of the times none of this applies. However, if you're setting up a work experience for a pre-ETS youth or a work experience for a general adult, you can have travel or transportation. It's simply the PBA, performance-based agreement, milestones, where we do not allow for travel and transportation.
Perfect. Then our next question is, would example 1 actually be billed under the group rate?
And that answer is no. When we're talking about travel, you just take your regular hourly rate. Because you saw 5 students, it depends. Sometimes you're traveling to a school and you're going to see each of those 5 students individually. Sometimes you're going and you're going to do a group of 5 students. So that's where we separate out the travel figuring for our group travel, and we just take it from your whole hourly rate. And then, if you saw the 5 students together for the actual service time, you'll charge the group rate. You may have seen those 5 students individually or in smaller groups that didn't qualify for the group rate is what I should say, since that's now 3 students or more. So.
Perfect. Thank you, Janine. And then the next one is, can contracts be amended to include transportation? And this specifically says transportation, but I'll throw travel in there as well.
Okay. Most of us as program specialists hopefully just included travel on your contract. I don't know that there's a reason we wouldn't, simply because that's kind of a standard thing that you go back and forth. Transportation, if you are willing to have the general commercial auto liability insurance that's outlined in the professional technical contract for the purpose of transporting other people, and you would like to add transportation to your contract, yes, we can do an amendment. Reach out to your program specialist. We might, depending on the need, wait until we're also going to be doing some other amendments, or we might do that right away, but just talk to your community partner specialist about that.
Perfect. Our next question is another clarification question. Under general services, did I understand that if we have multiple people in general services, we can travel for both people at the same time?
That's correct. So let's take an example, because it's more likely to happen that you're maybe out in general Minnesota, greater Minnesota, and you are driving from your office location in one town to another town where there's maybe a large industry of some sort, and you have more than one client that's working at that location. You can charge travel time for both individuals. Because again, we're not grouping together our general adults. The general services are supposed to be individual at all times. And so even though you happen to be going the same place, you're going for this person and for that person.
Perfect. Again, we had it come up whether travel is covered under the PBA, which we already answered that, but I'm just going to repeat it in case that person was not in at the moment. At this time, go for it, Janine.
Well, and also I was just going to say it kind of specifies transportation. Yes, if you're giving someone a ride as part of the PBA, unfortunately, that's not covered at this time.
Okay, and I've lost my spot.
I think we're on to Christina's question about a no-call, no-show pre-ETS.
Yep, that's what I
You
just
can still bill your travel time. So for example, I traveled all the way in southwestern Minnesota for an hour to go see Jess at school, and Jess, that turkey, did not text me or tell me that they weren't going to be in school that day. That time, let's say I was going to help Jess with job exploration counseling, I can still charge my hour, 1 or 2 hours that I drove round trip to see Jess. I would put that as pre-ETS, job exploration counseling, travel, and my starting location and end location, and I would simply invoice and report for that. And then on my other report that I turn in later about service hours, I can indicate that that date was a no-show. I can't charge for the time I would have spent meeting with Jess because it didn't happen, but I can charge for my travel time because I did do that. I drove back and forth and Jess just hadn't contacted me.
Perfect. Janine, our next question is, are the examples that were shown available on the deed website?
No, there are no examples currently posted on the deed website, but that's a great suggestion. We can look at adding some perhaps frequently asked questions or a couple of example worksheets to our definitions for travel and transportation, and maybe as well under our pre-ETS, since that's a different thing.
And then I always hate it when people call people out. And so that's why I haven't been listing who's asking these questions. But Erin Cross, you just did a follow-up question. Is there any chance you'd come off mute and kind of talk through where the question is? And if he doesn't unmute, maybe I'll just read this. Open, he puts this. Okay, let's read through this. Clarification, under general services, did I understand that if we have multiple people in general services, we can charge travel for both people at the same time? Meaning if I were to meet 2 people at the same time, can we charge both students for travel to and from? Okay. This covers general services, meaning travel to and from no-show general services.
Okay. I'm going to do my best with this.
Hey guys, it's Aaron.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Aaron.
There was two parts to that, and Jess, I don't mind you calling me out at all times. That's fine by me. There's two parts to that. One is the first one is when we're doing driver's permit and things like that, we get multiple students at the same time. So I just wanted to clarify that if we're going to a school, if the vendors are going to school to do driver's permit and we have multiple students doing the driver's permit at the same time, are we able to charge travel for each student for, you know, so I've got 3 people in working with at that same time. Did I understand that we could charge travel for all 3 students to and from? That's part of it. And the second part was, a second question because I was typing in notes and then I caught part of it. So I wanted a clarification on the second part was the general, if I get there and the students don't show up, we are able to, under general services, also charge for that travel time to and from because they did not show up and we did everything that we were supposed to. We double checked that they were going to meet with the meetings and blah, blah, blah. So there's two questions there. And I'm sorry, I was listening, but I also was typing in notes, so I didn't catch the full thing.
Oh, 100%. That's fine, Aaron. So you're saying the general service type. So these are students who maybe qualify for pre-employment transition services because they're students, but they're eligible for VR, and on their plan, they have a general service type and title of that driver's permit training. If you are going to see 2 or 3 of them, you can charge $50 an hour for your travel time for each student. When you see them under a pre-employment transition service type or title, that's when you do a group travel mathematical equation. We love making people do math. But if it is for a general service, it depends on what the travel is tied to. If the travel is tied to a general service, you can charge $50 an hour for your travel time per person.
Got it. Okay, that's perfect.
And then the no-shows apply to all people that we serve. You cannot charge for the actual no-show time. However, you can charge your travel time back and forth, both for general services and for pre-ETS students. Now, if I go to the school and 4 of my 5 students show up, I might not charge for the 5th student. I might just do my math by 4 because I saw 4 students, right?
Right. Yes.
That still works out for you. That's still the same amount of money total. So I wouldn't go to the effort to invoice and report separately for that 5th student that didn't show up. But that's kind of how that works. It works for all of the people we serve. If someone doesn't show up, but you actually traveled, you've provided the service to the state and the state can pay you for that. And then I see a question from Sarah. Yes, the $28 on the website is old. Contracts rolled out. We had a few last minute decisions. We were hustling and bustling. So there will be some updates, trainings, additional support as we look through our contracted services and some of the changes that have been made. Is it time for me to go on mute, Jess? What do you think? Are we?
Well, I was just going to say, I don't see any other questions coming through. We haven't received any. It seems like most people are going through the chat. And there's nothing else popping up there. There's nothing in the forum. So we may be.
We could open it up for questions outside of travel transportation. So if you have general questions that have been burning in your organization, if you have questions about new contracts, anything that's happening, you can either use the raise hand feature or you can put your question into chat. So if you have questions outside of travel and transportation, just other questions that you've had that you wanted to ask, you can certainly use this time for that as well.
And we did just have another one pop into the chat. The group rate in reference to pre-ETS, we invoice according for travel, according to the agreed upon pre-ETS service area. For example, invoice under workplace readiness training for travel. Are you going for it, Janine, or you want me to? You're going.
Oh, sorry. I just feel like I'm the travel lady today, but I could mute and let other people talk too. The group rate in reference to pre-ETS, we invoice according for travel. Yes, correct. So if you are headed to a school to do workplace readiness, you should, and you're going to see 3 students at the same time, you would take your $100 an hour divided by 3 and charge that as group travel to pre-ETS workplace readiness training for, and then I usually say to put a dash in the word travel or travel for pre-ETS workplace readiness training. If you're doing more than one service, we get even more math because you might have to take your group rate of $10 that we figured out for those 5 students, and maybe you provided 2 services, then you're charging $5 of group travel for each service line.
Thank you, Janine. And then Aaron Cross, you've got your hand raised if you want to come off mute.
Yeah, just a quick, I guess I've always been under the assumption, and I was told differently yesterday, that pre-ETS ends at age 22. But there's also been some other ages given to me by counselors and things like that, and timelines. So what I was told yesterday was it's age 22 and academic year, meaning fall to the spring. That is an academic year. So if when they get to the spring and they're 22, their pre-ETS stops. I always thought it was 21. How did I screwed up? If that's the case, I mean, we're clarifying, but I just want to make sure it is in fact 22 now.
Hey, Aaron, this is Sarah. Yes, it is when a person's birthday crosses from age 21 to 22. That's sort of the age out piece. So pre-ETS goes through age 21.
Oh, sorry. So if they're 21, I was on mute. I was talking to myself. Do that a lot. Okay. So if they're 21 and they're in school and they age to 22, they can still finish their academic year under pre-ETS. Is that correct?
Aaron, can I ask a clarifying question? Because VRS under WIOA has some different rules versus the school district. And so I guess that would be part of the question. So if somebody is still in school and under our rules, we have students, if you meet the definition of a transition age youth, you could receive pre-ETS up through 24 as long as you are continuing to have some sort of education plan in place. And so that's where it gets really confusing, where the school district and Department of Ed, their definition is 21. And I'll be honest, I don't know all of their rules off the top of my head. And so just clarifying school district versus VRS, because that could differ a little bit.
Okay, great. That's a huge thing. So I've got a student right now that's 21 in college. They're a sophomore in college, but we've always thought it was a hard line stop that it was 21. But from what I thought I just heard is if they're 21 and they turn 22 in the academic year, they can still receive pre-ETS in the college post-secondary realm. But now, Jess, I wasn't even thinking of the going to 24. So now it's even possible that you're gonna have to help me out on that one. They can still receive pre-ets, if they're 24, if they're in a transition program?
So I wish we had Alyssa Klein on here because she would know all of this information right off the top of her head. But there are some different sticking points under VRS that makes an individual be eligible for pre-ed services. The biggest one is age. And like I said, it's through 24. And they need to be in some sort of training program that allows them to be qualified as a student. And there is some gray in that because even if they were to stop like an 18 to 21 program and then move into college, I mean, depending on the gap, and there's some stipulations around that. So it's once they have left that pre-eds realm, they are no longer considered a pre-eds student. And maybe we should get Alyssa Klein to specifically give us all those talking points that make somebody eligible for a pre-ed student. And we could even send that out to this group later on. Or I can do some digging, but I know Alyssa Klein knows those talking points off the top of her head. Where
Okay, so Jess, I'm just going to just quickly, and because I spoke to Alyssa about this yesterday, and she said it was 22 within the academic year, but now I'm hearing 24. And so I whatever you guys want, it really, that's it's fine, but it's a little confusing when I was sure it was 21 for the longest time. Now I'm hearing Alyssa Klein saying 22, and now I'm hearing on this conversation it's 24. So, and I get there's gray areas and things like that, but it would just be really nice to know, because otherwise we don't want to be providing services for pre-eds and find out later that we should not have been doing that, and then have to go through the possible hassle of having to pay funds back and things like that. So.
And to be honest, Aaron, that wouldn't happen. VRS should know who they're referring and what age an individual, whether or not they're eligible for pre-ed services. So it would be an issue on our end, not an issue of you having to repay because you provided a pre-ed service for an individual that may not have fit that definition of pre-eds. And
Okay.
Sarah, I see your hand up too.
Yep, and Aaron, we'll bring this back to Alyssa and the pre-eds team, and kind of in Liz's comment, we will round back and let people know so that we don't create more confusion, but we'll get back to you on that.
Wonderful. I appreciate you guys. Thank you.
And I think at one point I saw Sarah Copeland's hand up in the air, but maybe did you throw it in the chat?
Yep, it's in the chat, Jess. It says
Good deal.
pre-ed age out questions. Someone who graduated from high school at 18 didn't go into a transition program. They're no longer qualified for pre-eds. That's
Correct.
accurate. And then Alana Rice said in a training program could include a technical training institute. That is also correct. And then there's a travel question, so I can keep talking if you want. Clarify for one total hour of travel at $50 an hour, the maximum you can bill is $50. If you had 5 participants, you need to submit 5 invoices for 10 each. It depends on if we're talking about general or pre-eds again, Sarah. So $50 an hour is our standardized rate for adult general services, but your service time is your actual travel rate for pre-employment transition services. So whatever that amount is, yes, if you had 5 participants, you would take the hour, divide it by the 5 students, and then invoice each student. But again, you can include it on your invoice for service time. So if I'm billing 2 hours at the group rate for Jess, because she was part of the student of group of 5, on her invoice, I would put, I spent 2 hours teaching Jess about job exploration counseling at the group rate. And then I would put my group travel for job exploration counseling, $10. So it's not that you have to submit 5 extra invoices. It would just be including that group travel amount that you came up with based on our kind of math equation that we use for that. You would just include that as an additional line, and your report could include a note for that date of service that you traveled from here to here, and there were 5 students, so you're billing this as the group travel rate.
Not seeing any other questions come in. Again, you can throw them in the chat. You can raise your hand. I'm always good sitting with silence for a little bit, but I'm going to take this silence as maybe don't have any other questions at this moment. And Sarah Sundin, are you wrapping us up today?
Yes, I certainly can.